Hawkeyes fans, it is your time here at the Voice of College Football every Tuesday, 4:30 Central Time. So make this appointment browsing on the internet to reach us right here every Tuesday. Bring those comments and questions. And, of course, we've got Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm, the guy that makes this work. 44 consecutive shows, 44 consecutive Tuesdays. Corey, how you doing today?
I'm good, Mark. How are you doing? I'm assuming it's nice weather out there. It's nice weather here.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good time of year. It's you're going to have some cold days, you're going to have some warm days, but for the most part we're warm. And I know in Iowa we'll get real hot in about a month, but I'm okay with that. The next time we start getting bad weather will be amid a pretty busy football season.
I complain quite a bit here from late October until maybe late April, but the weather in Connecticut from May to October, I cannot complain. I'd say over the last month we've had maybe 2 gloomy, rainy days, and the rest of it's been sunshine and anywhere from 75 to it's supposed to be 93 today. I don't think it hit 93, but I haven't been outside.
Well, it's warm here, but I'll tell you, we've had some storms, some pretty nasty storms in Iowa here recently. So hopefully things stay settled. I know it's supposed to be pretty mild over the next week. I know lots of very newsy. It's amazing how, and I could reflect back to 2021, Mark, at this time, and we weren't doing this specific show at that point last year, but I don't. I'm missing something. It just seems like there's always news now with Iowa football or Iowa basketball. There's just always something. And I know that's good for business, right, Mark, for you? I mean, as far as college football is concerned, there's always something to talk about. With NIL and the transfer portal, it's incredible. And do we want to get into the Charlie Jones situation right away? I figure we might as well.
Well, we will. And yes, I will acknowledge that the news cycle is busier than at any point that I can recall. At the same time, we do continue to create series, and the latest on the main channel would be, and you can certainly add to this, Corey, if you've got any suggestions for, started a series this morning. Is this the year blank? In the first video released, Michigan has not won in Columbus against Ohio State since the year 2000. So is this the year that Michigan finally wins in Columbus?
And no,
So
the
that
answer
is
to
our
that
first
question
one.
is 1,000% no. I
Okay,
foresee
1,000%.
I foresee a browbeating of Ohio State. I see day spanking Harbaugh. It's going to be a beatdown, and I'll enjoy every second of it, Mark.
Well, I did not bring that up to get your thoughts, which of course I always welcome. But I just to let you know, if you have any Iowa related, I do have an idea for one. I'm going to go through the total offense and the passing figures over the last 10 to 15 years, as we've discussed, and I'm going to try to figure out kind of a reasonable but optimistic bar. You know, is this the year that Iowa finishes top 40 in passing, top 40 in total offense?
Yeah.
Whatever that jump seems to be for the first time since fill in the blank. Is this the year? So our release coming up on Wednesday morning will be Notre Dame related. There is something that Notre Dame has not accomplished for a long, long time, and we will discuss that. But let's talk Iowa. Let's talk Charlie Jones. Pardon me?
I said I love that idea. And the topic of Notre Dame goes right in line with Charlie Jones, because there have been some rumors that Notre Dame might be interested in Charlie Jones. I had a guy call into my live show, Hawkeye Hangout, on From the Hawkeye the Storm channel last week, and made a comment about Charlie and there being rumors online about this. And again, rumors are rumors. I've heard even more rumors about Purdue that's been circulating. A specific Iowa media member tweeted something out last week, and I don't know if it was on any authority, if it was just speculation, but he tweeted out something about potentially Purdue getting involved with Charlie. If that were to happen, Mark, and Charlie ends up going to Purdue, and, you know, as you know, Purdue lost Milton Wright, their top receiver, due to academic problems. If he ends up going to Purdue, like, that's going to change that. To me, all of a sudden, that becomes one of those short-term rivalries, because they've nabbed Tracy, they've nabbed Charlie Jones. And let's not forget another guy that they nabbed 2 years ago, DJ Johnson, who was a really good corner at Iowa. Played a lot his freshman year. Brom took him as well. So I don't know if that will happen. Listen, if I'm a Purdue fan, I love it. I love the idea of being able to say, hey, guy enters the portal from a rival school within the division, I'm going to take him. If it's within the rules, why not? I know a lot of coaches don't like the idea of taking players within the conference, let alone the division. But certainly they need help at receiver, and they're predicated on good receiver play. You could also argue from a Purdue standpoint, I think Charlie Jones is really good, by the way, but from a Purdue standpoint, do you really want to be poaching wide receivers from Iowa? Of any position on the field, do you really want to be poaching wide receivers? Again, I think Tracy and Jones do have a pretty special skill set. And as we've talked about, Mark, I do not believe that the majority of Iowa's offensive woes have been because of receiver play. You and I have established that. There's a couple of positions I'd put above receiver play. So I'm not saying to be a bad move, but no news yet. I did think it was a little odd that he entered when he entered, in mid-May, mid to late May. But he's a grad transfer, so it's not like the May 1st deadline means much of anything to him. Not to my understanding. He's able to get immediate eligibility regardless. That May 1st deadline, so just for anybody so that they're aware, that May 1st deadline just has to do with the one-time transfer exemption. So if you're automatically eligible to transfer and play right away as a grad transfer, who cares about May 1st deadline? That deadline really doesn't apply to you. I wish the best for Charlie Jones. Do I think there's a chance he could come back? I doubt it. I think I'd say that just about anybody that enters the portal. But you never know. And would I be upset if he goes to Purdue? I mean, who am I upset at? Who am I going to be upset at? Am I going to be upset at NIL because, there's rumors that it's NIL. I don't know if Purdue is recruiting him with NIL. When am I going to be upset at Brom, upset at Brian, upset at Kirk? I don't know who to be upset about. I just wish the kid the best, and I hope Iowa beats him in October or whenever they face him.
NIL is, of course, the first thing that comes to mind for many people, and for good reason in this day and age. However, just let's take that possibility out of it. You're Charlie Jones. You caught 21 passes last year. There is no Iowa wide receiver, so we're bypassing running backs and Sam Laporta at tight end, that caught more than 25 passes last year. You have an opportunity to play with a top 10 quarterback in the nation in Aiden O'Connell. And wide receivers caught the likes of David Bell, 93, Milton Wright, 57. Wide receivers like Jackson Anthrop caught 53 passes last year. They had 4 or 5 wide receivers catch more passes than anybody on Iowa's receiving corps. And if Charlie Jones has aspirations for the NFL, which I believe he does, why wouldn't you make that move?
Correct me if I'm wrong. You just said that Iowa didn't have a single wide receiver last year that surpassed 25 catches on the season. Did I hear that right?
Yes.
Boy, doesn't that just make the hair stand up on your back? I mean, that means no receiver averaged two catches. Am I correct in saying that?
My apologies. I was off by 1. Nico Reganey, 26 receptions.
But still, that means no wide receiver averaged 2 catches a game. That's another problem. We're talking about the offense, and I know Don Patterson has talked about this explicitly, but they need to figure out how to get wide receivers more involved. And so losing receivers to the portal is not a good thing. That's a startling number. I want to address this as well. I know we're going to get to Rutgers here in a second. We've got a guest coming on. But Mark, in addition to Charlie Jones leaving, Alondo Trader opts out of Iowa football. He was scheduled to get here this summer. So with Alondo leaving, that's a big deal because even though he hadn't stepped foot on campus, he was part of a really highly touted defensive back room coming in 22. Good news is they did get a late signee during the late period, or the regular period, I guess is what we should be calling it. Deshaun Lee, high on him. We can talk more about that later in the show, perhaps, Mark. But again, Trader and Jones in one day. I believe it was last Wednesday that we got the news from both.
Yes. So on September 24th, Iowa has a trip out to the East Coast to take on Rutgers. I'm a box score nerd, And this just came to mind. I was not thinking about this in any kind of preparation for this conversation we're having on Rutgers football, but I believe somebody can hold me to this. The last time these two teams got together was in Iowa City. I believe the final was 30-0. And if you look at the Rutgers box score on the offensive side of the ball against Iowa, it is one of the most anemic, deplorable offensive efforts you will ever see in a box score. But that's ancient history to a certain extent now. Of course, you got Greg Schiano back for his second stint at Rutgers. He did wonders the first time around. And considering that this was a program that had lost 21 consecutive Big Ten games, and most of those by 4 and 5 and 6 touchdown spreads, they've won 5 games in the conference, or let's make that, 4 games in the conference the last 2 years. 5-8 season, getting to a bowl game under unusual circumstances. Of course, last year we got Richie Schneiderite on the line from Rutgers' rival platform here at the Voice of College Football on our Iowa show. Richie, how you doing today?
What's going on, guys? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you, Richie. Being here.
Can I just say something before you get into this, Mark? I just want to make a comment about baseball. I think it's a disgrace to the game of baseball, and it's a disgrace to the NCAA tournament committee that Rutgers is not in the field of 64. And I mean disgraceful. It's an absolute travesty, and I could argue that Iowa deserved to get in as well, but Rutgers deserved to get in primarily. And the fact that the Big Ten doesn't have a true double elimination tournament is disgraceful. I've never been so disillusioned by a weekend of baseball, because I'm not a big baseball guy, but I just want to say that to you, that I am absolutely what a disgrace to the game of college baseball.
Yeah, no, it was kind of ridiculous. A 45-win season. I know their out-of-conference schedule wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but come on, 45 wins, second place in the regular season Big Ten, second place in the Big Ten tournament, and they just got beat by a red-hot Michigan team. That's all it was, really.
They got beat once. They got beat once. They didn't get beat twice. They got beat once.
Beyond aggravating, especially because if you're double elimination, just do it all the way. Why not? Why just stop at the championship? And we all know, if you watch baseball, you know it's not a one-game sport. Like, you need to at least have a 3-game series, maybe, or something like that.
I just don't even know why we're calling it double elimination when it's not really double elimination.
It's ridiculous. But yeah, no, I heard you guys talking about Iowa's anemic offense, if you want to call it that. We're here to talk about Rutgers' offense, which hasn't done much of anything over the past decade or something. So,
well, I was mentioning to Corey that I still remember, I'm a bit of a box score stats nerd. The last time Rutgers played Iowa, maybe I'll pull up the box score. That was one of the more anemic performances. But yes, on a weekly basis, Corey and I discuss the Iowa offense and those anemic performances in total. But focusing on Rutgers, the last time to Iowa City, 30-0, I believe. I'll double check that one. Yeah, let's start here. Greg Schiano, certainly, 21 consecutive losses in the Big Ten. I cited that a few minutes ago before we brought you on, and just losing, getting trampled. Now, of course, they're nowhere close to being contenders at this point, but he steps in, and just his sheer ability to go out there in the transfer portal, even within the Big Ten, bring in guys, put Band-Aids on the team, just his ability to organize and lead and do all those things suddenly makes them respectable, where they were on the verge of bowl eligibility, got the offer anyway because of the situation in the Gator Bowl. Just your thoughts about Greg Schiano being back and lifting them up to the edge of respectability.
So I know some fans that are listening to this are probably going to roast me a little bit, but I don't know if there's a better coach out there to coach Rutgers and try to bring them back to that one promised land season of 2006 than Greg Schiano. He lives and breathes New Jersey. He's a New Jersey native. He's got a bunch of assistant coaches from Jersey, whether that be from some of the top high school programs that produce D1 talent year in and year out. And Nunzio Campanelli, who coached at Bergen Catholic, who I'm sure most of your fans are familiar with. And then St. Joe's Regional is now producing like 10 plus D1 prospects too. And they just hired their head coach when Schiano came back on board, and Augie Hoffman. So I would think that there really isn't a better option out there than Greg Schiano. He's arguably the only coach that was able to bring Rutgers to the top 10. So, I mean, who else would be a better option than him?
Mark, I feel like I should add this in just so that Richie's aware. that because everybody comes on the show and oftentimes we tell you we're coming on an Iowa show. Mark is not an Iowa guy, for the record. I'm the only Iowa guy here. Mark's a college football guy, so he's actually Ohio State fan. Is my okay to say that, Mark?
You're okay. It's out there. I try to keep
East.
it under wraps to a certain extent because we run a unbiased network of 25 channels here, Richie, but the cat's out of the bag. It's out there.
Yeah. Well, I can't say he was great with Ohio State, but I think he's a pretty good fit for Rutgers. So, I mean.
I agree. And let me just say this for anybody that doesn't know, this is just the third time these two teams have faced since Rutgers joined the Big Ten. Now think about that for a second, Mark. Yeah. What's it been, 10 years, Richie, since the Scarlet Knights joined the Big Ten?
Yeah, what year is it now? 2022. Yeah, that's about right. Wow.
You mentioned Mark, you mentioned the 30-0 beatdown, but I recall a game in 2016. The only other time they played out in New Jersey was a very tight game, a very ugly game, 14-7 game. Richie, what do you remember about that one? I know George Kittle knocked off a big play. That was obviously a disappointing season for Iowa. Came into the year with a lot of expectations, but still, it proved to be a tough place to play. And that was not a great stretch. What was Rutgers' record? Does anybody remember Rutgers' record in 2016?
2016. I think that was the year where Chris Ash had 2 or 3 Big Ten wins. Yeah, they rattled off. I think he beat a Purdue and he beat someone else. I can't remember who it was. But, yeah, I mean, obviously, since Schiano left, it hasn't been pretty. Kyle Flood was kind of holding it together a little bit, and they did win a share of the Big East Conference back when they were in it in Flood's first year. But after that, it was all downhill, and then Chris Ash just wasn't a good fit. Another Ohio State guy just wasn't a really good fit for the program whatsoever. I think he was way in over his head in terms of head coaching ability. I know it was his first ever job. But New Jersey's different. In order to keep some of these guys home, you can't bring in a staff like Ash did of a bunch of Midwestern guys and think like, hey, they're going to connect with these Jersey dudes right away. I think what Schiano's trying to do, and what I said before a little bit, he's bringing in Jersey guys, whether it be the high school route or former Jersey guys, and like Sean Gleason, who went away to Oklahoma State, is now back as offensive coordinator. These guys just kind of resonate with the whole New Jersey attitude, the Jersey tough guy, and I think that's why it's kind of showing on the recruiting trail a little bit. They just had a top 40 class, a 4-star quarterback, a bunch of other 4 stars, a running back, a receiver, and you haven't seen this since Schiano 1.0, as I like to call it.
What has he brought from in the NFL? I mean, obviously his experience has to help. Yeah. And there was obviously a lot of controversy about how he mixed in with players at the next level. What makes him a better college coach, and what did he take, do you think, from the league that is helping him? And there's no question that they're on an upward trend right now.
Yeah, no, he actually doesn't talk about his time in the league too much. He actually talks a lot more about his time at Ohio State and how much he learned from a guy like Urban Meyer. And then he was with Bill Belichick for, like, I want to say 2-3 months in a weird kind of situation up there in the offseason a couple years ago. And he was supposed to be DC, and then he kind of just left. Something to do with family, but he talks about being with those two guys and how much he's learned from them too, whether it be recruiting from Urban Meyer and taking different approaches. Being like, one thing he really has struggled with during his first tenure at Rutgers was he was too hands-on, whether it be with the quarterback situation, which was like a carousel every year. Even though they had a freshman All-American NFL player in Tom Savage, he got benched, and it's like, all right, well, what are we doing here? So. But he was very too hands-on with that, too hands-on with recruiting. Now he's kind of a little more hands-off, and I think it's starting to show a little bit in terms of the offense. Offense is starting to show life. They're not just cycling in quarterbacks in and out now. Overall, I mean, he learned a lot from those two guys, and I think it's starting to show a little bit, and you'll see that competitiveness. And now we're on the verge of talking about another potential bowl season for Rutgers.
Ed wants to know how old Greg is.
58, something like that. I'm not sure 100% off the top of my head. He might be 60 now, actually.
Mark, do you think he's close to 60?
You didn't allow me my scolding of the chat. When anybody asks what I consider a Google question, I'm like, why are you asking us? You can Google that. Greg Schiano,
all right,
age, boom. There you go.
Taking off the question from Ed.
Fair enough.
Was it Janarion Grant? Was that the guy that in 16? Grant. Yeah, and I don't remember his numbers. Again, that was a low-scoring game, but I just remember that being a really difficult game. And I always had some rough trips to Piscataway. Well, the one to Piscataway, and they had one in 14 to Maryland. Certainly, I look at Rutgers, and Mark mentioned the 5-7 bowl trip last year. How do you see fans viewing that? I mean, is the feeling around the program that okay, we've kind of returned now, because I do think of Rutgers football as being, I remember them playing Iowa State when they were in the Big East towards the end of their time there, and that being a respectable program. Does it feel like things have kind of turned the corner, especially with being able to be bowl eligible, albeit during a 5-7 season?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty close. I mean, they're always going to schedule, like, a big thing with Shiano again that he did during his first tenure was he's going to schedule a couple cupcakes when it comes out of conference, get those 3 wins, and then all you have to do is just win 3 Big Ten games. Now, like you said, Iowa might have a down year one year. You might be able to snag a win against them, or like Nebraska and Illinois, or just try to beat up on the lower guys in the Big Ten. And yeah, I mean, getting a bowl game last year was huge. It obviously weird circumstances with like the top APR score and having 5 wins and someone bowing out. I don't think anyone expected Rutgers in the Gator Bowl under Shiano in year 3/2 if you count that COVID year. But yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely huge. It gives him a little bit of more respectability. He can kind of pat his chest and say, "Hey, I made it to a bowl game last year. We could do this again this year, guys. Like, let's just keep this up." And then I don't know if they'll ever, like, to be honest with you, I don't know if they'll ever win a Big Ten title in football. It's just extremely hard to get up to the ranks of like the Ohio States, and Iowa manages to do it every a couple of years now. I mean, it's been a little bit, but yeah, I think it's going to take time. But as long as they can get to a bowl game like every 2 to 3 years, I mean, that's pretty respectable considering this was a team that had 5 wins under Chris Hash, 6 wins total.
And let's be honest, that's a lofty goal. I'm not saying they can't achieve it, but I'm just saying that's a lofty goal in that division. If it stays in place, the way the division, I know there's a lot of debate about that, and that kind of leads me into my next topic, Mark. And you may be sort of an interesting take on this as well. And I'm no expert on how the Big Ten schedules, but my understanding is it's kind of been set up like a lottery as it relates to cross divisional games. And Iowa actually drew Rutgers for the foreseeable future, and I think Iowa's built in. And I know that everybody's freaking out because the schedules are down on all the different university websites. They've been down for a few weeks now. But part of that may just be because of the you brought up COVID scheduling problems, so they got to reevaluate everything.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if that game will stay as it's scheduled, because I think they're scheduled 3 to 4 years. I could grab this, but Iowa fans better get used to playing a team they haven't played very much, because they are scheduled moving forward. And Mark, I'm curious your thoughts on scheduling. If the divisions are taken away, do you have any insight into, will the Big Ten Conference just completely wipe clean the current matchups as they stand, especially with their cross-divisional matchups? Why, I don't know why it would matter. Obviously you don't want to be conference division heavy, but if there's no divisions, if you get the drift that I'm trying to put out there.
So before I address that, good timing on the Greg Schiano question, because he's got a birthday tomorrow. We should have, had we known, we would have moved the show to tomorrow and sung happy birthday to Greg Schiano. So he's going to be,
so that was Ed, this is Ed, Mark. So Ed stepped up to the plate. So after you took a shot at Ed, he said, okay, I'm going to utilize my free Google. And thank you, Ed.
Yes, we know he has internet connection because he's watching. So I just simply asked, you can look that up yourself. My thoughts about the scheduling is, so the ACC has already released its model going forward. They're abolishing the divisions, and they're going with a 3-5-5 model. And they've got 14 teams, just like the Big Ten. They're designating 3 teams that they're going to play as rivals. I put that in quotes because not everyone's got exactly three rivals. So that's one thing I don't like about it. But anyway, 3 protected games each year. And then you split the rest of the conference into 2 5 team groups, and you alternate playing those 2 groups. And therefore, the athletes, the fans, everybody gets to see every team in the conference every other year. So that's what I like about it, because as it stands right now, well, this is not an issue in the Big Ten like it is in the ACC and the SEC. They don't see teams for 6 years in the other division. That doesn't happen in the Big Ten. But I don't like the artificial approach of saying that, we have to protect 3 games for every team, 3 opponents. I think it's different for every opponent. And I know this makes scheduling a little bit more complicated, but I think you look at Iowa and say, who does Iowa need to play every year? Do they need to play Nebraska, Wisconsin, Minnesota? Certainly Minnesota. And then from there, each team has its own number of what I consider to be rivals. Now, Rutgers might be on the outside looking in regards to rivalries, true rivalries in the conference, but
Mm-hmm.
I think the Big Ten needs to kind of help that along and, kind of promote a burgeoning rivalry with, let's say, Maryland and maybe even Penn State,
Mm-hmm.
and then, kind of build the schedule around that. And I would build a 500 composite schedule. If anybody watches me on a regular basis here, they hear me say this all the time. 500 composite schedule would be my goal for everyone every season after the rivalry games are protected. But I think that 3-5-5 model's out there.
Yeah, and so it will be interesting to see what transpires. I can say this, that when you look at Iowa's schedule this season, you open with South Dakota State, you get Iowa State, you get Nevada. Probably a tougher start to the schedule than what Rutgers has. I did peek at Rutgers' schedule. If I recall, Boston College, right?
Yep.
They open with Boston College. Mark, you've got the schedule in front of you, I can tell.
Yeah, I do. So there's a trip to Boston College. Not an easy task there. They're going to be a bowl team, you would think.
Yeah.
Wagner and at Temple, obviously those are must wins. And then it gets pretty brutal from there with Iowa, Ohio State diving into Big Ten play. So, Richie, you had mentioned the formula for getting to a bowl game. So when you look at this schedule, you kind of touched on it. So you're thinking sweep outside the Big Ten, and then you grab 3 more wins.
I might have jumped the gun a little bit. I mean, it's definitely going to be tough. If you snag that first win against Boston College in Boston College, I think that's kind of your litmus test. That's what's going to happen. And if you could beat Jeff Hafley, former Rutgers guy, former Schiano prodigy, is now the head coach up there. So if you could snag that one, I don't see a reason why you shouldn't be able to snag the next 2 against Wagner and Temple. After that, that's where it gets tough. I don't know how good this Iowa team is yet this year. You guys obviously can talk more about that. But Ohio State, you just mark it an L. That one's, I don't know if that one will ever happen. But Nebraska, and I think Nebraska is beatable. They're always such a weird team. It seems like under, geez, I can't even think of his name.
Frost,
yes, under Scott Frost. It seems like they're up, down. Fans hate them, fans love them. I don't know what goes on over there. Indiana, potentially winnable, and then it's just one more, and maybe that's that Maryland game which has gone back and forth over the past couple of years, or maybe who knows, maybe they could snag a game against Penn State, because those have been pretty competitive despite Rutgers' record that was pretty porous over the past couple seasons.
And I was going to make a point that it would appear to me, without even looking at the schedule, that Rutgers this year would draw a somewhat favorable cross-divisional schedule, but they really don't, because they get Iowa and Minnesota.
Yeah.
And yeah, you get Nebraska. But the reason I thought that is because, Mark, you and I have talked about how the top three of the top 4 contenders in the Big Ten all have difficult cross-divisional schedules. Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and yet both of those teams also draw Rutgers. So the other 2 must be, I know Iowa, of course, plays Ohio State and Michigan.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's tough.
It is tough. I don't know if they could pull it off, but I think there's an outside shot. It's all about that first game, I think, though, and that's going to kind of determine where this year is going to go.
Okay, so I'm looking at Rutgers roster, and let me know if I'm behind on any of these guys. Obviously, Aaron Cruikshank is a guy who's going to be very heavily involved in the offense. Am I correct in saying that? Senior laden team. You got Taj Harris, Sean Ryan, right? They're both seniors coming back. Offensively, what should Iowa fans expect from a pretty experienced offense?
So that's what it's kind of interesting. You say experience, but when I look at it, it's a little different, because Taj Harris and Sean Ryan just transferred in 3 months ago. Taj Harris is a weird case where he was one of the better receivers in ACC with Syracuse. He had 800 yards, not last season, but the season before that. This past year, he put up 100 plus on Rutgers receiving yards, and just kind of left their team out of nowhere. Now, he's a Jersey native, so that's kind of played into the factor of how he ended up back at Rutgers. I think it's like a second chance type thing for him. But he's proven time and time again that he can produce against some of the top teams, albeit it is the ACC and versus the Big Ten, but it's still pretty impressive. Sean Ryan is another transfer receiver. He's had a couple interesting games against opponents down in the Big 12 with West Virginia. Not as big as a receiving threat, but he is a tall 6'4", 6'5", a legit 6'5", and he could be that tall receiver, red zone threat for Rutgers that they haven't really had probably since Schiano was here last. Now the interesting thing is they lost their top receiver in Bo Melton, who I'm sure most of the Big Ten knows by now. They lost their top running back in Isaiah Pacheco, these two guys were leading the team on offense for the past 3 seasons. Where's this production going to come from? So you got to hope those two guys step up. And then quarterback play is a little kind of iffy still because they did bring in a 4-star in Gavin Wimsatt last season. But technically, he enrolled in September. He pulled the Quinn Ewers and did the same thing he did. And he's been with the team ever since. He preserved his red shirt. So now, can he live up to that 4-star ability? It's kind of only wait and see approach right now until kickoff, I guess.
And I think quarterback is kind of my last thing that I wanted to ask Mark, and maybe you got something as well. But it's interesting. You talk about Noah Vedral, right? Who's boy, he's one of the more experienced guys in college. This is what, year 6 for him?
Yep.
This is like Rutgers' version of Jordan Bohannon, for Pete's sake. So, honestly, I mean, Spencer Petras has got some experience too. The numbers are very similar, Mark, and we know there are different styles of quarterbacks, certainly. But you look at just last year, Vedral just under 60%, 59.5% completion percentage, a little over 1,800 yards, 6.1 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 114 passer rating. Here's Spencer Petras numbers: 57% through the air, a little over 1,800 yards, 6.5 yards per attempt, 10 touchdowns, 9 picks, and a 117 passer rating. I mean, those are almost identical.
Yeah.
And that's not a good thing for either of us. Richie,
not at all.
Those are not good numbers.
No.
So it will be interesting to see, is this going to be a low grinded out type game? Can Iowa get the offensive? Can they control? I think that's probably where Iowa is going to win this game, is controlling the line. So maybe that should be the last question for you that I have, Richie, is can Rutgers' defensive line get a push? Can their offensive line get a push? And if not, how are you going to win a game not winning the line of scrimmage? And the only way to really do that, I would suspect, would be through skill position players. And of course, they've got some experienced transfers.
Yeah. So, I mean, defensive line, it's a big question mark. They lost Julius Turner, who was Matt Millen's favorite player of all time. If you ever watched a Rutgers game last season, he can't stop raving about him. So they lost a starting defensive tackle to graduation.
Give me that name one more time, Richie.
Matt Millen.
No, the Matt Millen.
Oh, Julius Turner.
Julius Turner. Okay.
Yeah,
yes, it's funny listening to Matt Millen call games. So I'm amused by Matt Millen. So I can hear him, praising a particular player that plays like left guard and him just focusing on him the entire game.
Yeah,
that's what he does. Okay,
he loved him. He was every game, it didn't matter. And somehow he wouldn't even make the play, and it's just like, oh, Julius Turner, did you watch him? And I'm like, he didn't do anything.
But Matt Millen's a good guy, though. Can we all agree on that?
Great,
absolutely.
Guy.
A good
100%.
guy.
Yeah. But so they lost their starting defensive tackle. They just lost Mohamed Toure, their starting edge rusher, probably for the season. That's not 100% official, but he got injured in the spring. He's probably out. So I don't know how the defensive line is going to do. But in terms of the offensive line, they're trying to overhaul that whole situation in the offensive line room right now. They just brought in 4 transfers, 7 incoming freshmen on the offensive line. So there's bodies that are just new guys that are just going to cycle in. Now, obviously, it's going to take time to gel, but you got a Minnesota transfer, a former 4-star. You got J.D. Dorenzo, who's a former, I forget, Patriot League, I believe it is at Sacred Heart. Forget what conference they're in down there. But, I mean, they brought in all conference guys and big name recruits or former recruits via the transfer portal. So it's kind of going to be a wait and see approach, but it will be a new line. So if they can gel and kind of get that push up front, there's no reason why a guy like Vedral or the 4-star quarterback Gavin Wimsatt I was mentioning before can't kind of step up and then take that offense to the next level.
Would not be shocked. It's a road game, Mark. I would not be shocked to see it played close. I do think Iowa's going to win. I don't know. I think you'd be hard pressed to find an unbiased fan at this point that's going to pick Rutgers, but I do respect Greg Schiano as a coach. I think the additions of Schiano and Bielema to maybe the 2 worst programs, no offense to Rutgers fans, but as far as the lowest performing schools in the Big Ten, I think was a huge boost to the conference. But I would still pick Iowa. But again, history is the only thing we have here. Last time Iowa went to Rutgers, it was 14-7. Iowa squeaked by in a very, very talented, loaded 2016 roster, Mark.
That loaded 2016 roster barely slipped by. And I do remember that game. I don't know that I sat and watched it, but that Rutgers team only won 2 games, and they won no games in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And it was a tight game.
Weird
All
year.
right. Richie Schneiderite, you can catch his work at Rutgers rival site. Richie, we appreciate you stopping by, breaking down Rutgers for us. And have a great summer, and we hope to have you back.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Thanks for having me.
Talk the week of the game, okay, Richie?
Yeah, of course. It sounds good to me.
That was fun.
Yes, I am going to pull up that box score just for my own satisfaction. Not the 14-7 game, but the last trip at 30-0. Because even though
as bad
Iowa
as the Michigan Rutgers score,
that one as well, 78-0. But even the Iowa game, the offensive, it was like negative yards passing. It was just atrocious.
Negative yards passing.
Yes.
Wait a minute. How can you have negative yards passing? Do the interception returns count against?
No, you complete like 2 passes and they're behind the line of scrimmage and guys get tackled.
Oh,
yes.
My.
I'm going to find it.
That's hard to do. That's actually hard to do.
It is difficult to do. Yes. As you break down the transfer portal news concerning Orlando Trader.
Sure.
I'm going to search for this box score.
Technically not transfer portal because it sounds like he's looking to get a release from Iowa. And so I did want to go through while you're doing that, Mark, because this is transfer portal related. Alan made a good comment here, talks about Purdue. Again, I don't know if this is official yet. Certainly Iowa, if they lose another guy to Purdue, we're looking at a spirited rivalry within the division, because that means Purdue's nabbed 2 of Iowa's. I know Tracy had a down year, but heading into last year, 2 of Iowa's best receivers. And then there was a couple other comments I wanted to get to. So this was an interesting comment. I'm glad. I'd like to know who Iowa Hawkeye superfan is. Good to see you here, sir or ma'am. But the comment is actually in response to the surprising news today. I was a little bit surprised by this news. Iowa nabs a walk-on, Jordan Cum, who's a wide receiver from Iowa Central Community College, 5'10", 190. And I'm looking at Rivals, and they're reporting that he had 29 catches this past year at Iowa Central, 380 yards through the air, 19 punt returns for 166 yards, and 1 touchdown for the Tritons. And I just wonder, I'm not implying that this is definitely what's happening, but you just wonder, the week after losing Charlie Jones to the transfer portal, and here you have a guy who, has returned punts, and not that they don't have somebody else, but I don't know who else is going to return punts for Iowa. Is it going to be Arlen Bruce? Is it going to be Xavier Wampa? Could it be TJ Hall, Iowa freshman? That's possible. But I thought it was interesting. So he'll come here as a walk-on. Rivals reporting that he actually played high school football with Brody Brecht, trained with Gavin Williams and Xavier Wampa. Brody Brecht is an interesting discussion right now, too, because he pitched on Sunday, had a really difficult performance, lasted a third of an inning, and had to be pulled. I thought it was an interesting decision to play him when they did, but when you're in a tournament setting, sometimes you don't have much of a choice. But so I saw some people pumping the brakes on the Brody to the MLB talk that we've had since he's gotten on campus. And that doesn't mean he's not going to have a future in baseball, but he's a guy who now can benefit from Charlie Jones leaving. Can he work into the mix? You lose Tracy, you lose Charlie Jones. I know Desmond Hudson, he's gone. He was a bigger guy, never played really at Iowa, but they've lost a lot of receivers during this cycle. And so you do have to wonder now, a guy like Brody, can he find some playing time? I think it's difficult when you're missing time in the spring to baseball. It was interesting. Danan Hughes, the great Danan Hughes, was actually the sideline reporter for, if you would call him a sideline reporter, but the reporter for Big Ten Network over the weekend at the Big Ten tournament. Of course, he was a baseball and football star at Iowa. I believe he does Chiefs radio now down in Kansas City. So he's proven, and other guys have proven that you can do both. Kyler Murray is another example, but it's hard. it's hard, Mark, and especially now with the demands of being a college football athlete to try to split your time. We've seen Connor McCaffrey try to do that, and he's since given up on baseball. And I don't want to speak for him as to why that is, but I'll be intrigued by it because Brody's, as I've said before, he's one of the few guys on this roster at that position that has size. Now, Jordan Cumm does not have size, but again, because of his ability to return punts. Another name to watch for to replace Charlie Jones would be Caden Wetjen. I don't know if he'll end up doing it, but I've heard good things about him. I'm going to produce some content on him in the coming days. But Caden Wetjen, transfer here, who's here kind of flying under the radar, impressed some people this spring. Brody Breck stands at 6'4", according to Rivals. That's a big guy. That's your prototypical X, maybe a replacement for Brandon Smith. So can he step up? It's going to be hard, though, to break through the top three still, but they're not real deep at that position. So will they go to the transfer portal and nab somebody else? Doubtful, but yeah, this is fascinating stuff, Mark, because we're still late May. We got a couple months. They could easily go out and grab a grad transfer who plays right away because they're just not that deep at that position right now.
All right. If my typing was slightly quicker and we had enough folder space, I would have had this perfectly timed. But okay, I'm all set now. We want to make sure that we acknowledge a couple polls that we had sent out just to let everyone know what the results are. So the first one, albeit dated, so we won't spend time on it, but at the time of the Baylor transfer quarterback Jerry Bohannon, who had decided to leave for USF, we asked the question, should Iowa recruit Baylor transfer quarterback Bohannon? 81% of you said yes, and that, of course, is null and void now. So I stated it this way on the page, considering the 2022 recruiting class, considering the transfer portal additions and subtractions, the NFL losses, everything in total, do you believe that Iowa's a better roster right now than it was at the conclusion of the 21 season? And 44% of you said yes, and the majority say no.
You want to know how I voted? Because I voted on this poll.
I did too.
What'd you vote, Mark?
No.
You voted no. You voted no.
They're not better.
Let me find out what I voted, because I know I went back and forth on this, actually.
Okay.
I voted yes.
So it's not obvious. I thought it was obvious. Okay. What are your points on the positive side?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I want to preface this by saying that for anybody who says, how could you say that, Corey? You've been talking about how this season's not going to be anywhere close to what last year was. I'm basing a lot of that on scheduling, right? We've talked about the difference in the schedule. It's just night and day between 2021 and 2022. But I didn't dive into this as probably as deep as I should if we want to actually, publish a segment on this officially. But I just look at the fact that, okay, you lose Tyler Linderbaum. Who else do you lose? Okay, you lose Tyler Linderbaum, Dane Belton. Really, those are your two really big losses. You lose nobody at receiver. You lose Tyler Goodson. I shouldn't disclude him. That's a significant loss. But how about Tyler Goodson struggled at times last year? And frankly, I think Iowa will benefit from having more of a downfield runner, whether it be Gavin Williams, LaShawn Williams, maybe a Caleb Johnson or Jazian Patterson. And I look at the defense, and, really you don't lose much of anything from defense. You lose Matt Hankins on the back end. You lose Jack Kerner, sure tackler. And I just think they're going to be strong. They get all their linebackers back. We've talked about that. Their defensive line basically returns almost everybody. I just think they'll be as good, maybe a little better. And, quarterback play, I don't think can get a ton worse. I mean, I guess Petras could come out there to start throwing interceptions, but I don't see that happening because I don't think Kirk would continue to ride with him if that happened. I just think the schedule is the difference. I think Iowa's right on pace to what they were last year, maybe even a little bit better. This is going to sound crazy because I know Iowa put up some wonky numbers from a turnover standpoint, but I think Iowa's actually potentially going to be better on defense. collectively. That doesn't mean they're going to produce. That doesn't mean they're going to produce more turnovers or anything like that, because we know some of those things are chance. But I just don't know what do they lose, Mark, that would make us think. I know they lose Belton, they lose Kerner, and they lose Hankins, and I just don't know where else you look. And Van Valkenburg certainly, but Van Valkenburg was not a dynamic edge rusher. He was a good, solid Big Ten player. I just think I would have to think that development improvement will supersede those losses.
Well,
and they bring in a 5-star recruit in Xavier Wampa.
Yeah. So I will say first and foremost that if you just take just about any team's gains versus losses going from season to season, it always appears on the surface as though the losses are greater, because if that's an NFL producing program like Iowa is, then those are proven commodities. But obviously teams get better, and not every team in the major team in the country is getting worse, because players are being developed, and guys that we don't know about are being developed and going to turn out to be either really good role players or impact players or all conference players. So those are unknowns. So I was going with everybody that you just mentioned and really not having a good feel for anybody outside of Wampa that's the obvious because of his recruiting ranking that are going to be stepping in, and because of the transfer portal not yielding anything significant.
Sure. And let me just say this. We spend, and I know we got a lot more time to talk about Iowa football in the coming months, but we spent so much time in the spring breaking down each position individually. But we should probably just generalize things a bit more. And you brought up players who either Iowa brought in or who I foresee stepping up. Xavier Wampa certainly has to be in the discussion. Cooper DeJean. If you want to broaden things, I think he's going to step up and do a role. Will it be at safety? Will it be at cash? Will it be at corner? I don't know, but I think he's a tremendous athlete. Maybe he returns punts or kicks. So he's a guy I foresee stepping up. Heard really good things about Quinn Schulte, walk-on, but Iowa tends to have success playing walk-ons at the safety position. Sebastian Castro, I don't know as much about Sebastian, but he was listed on the depth chart early in the spring, so I don't know potential there. Heard really good things about Lucas Van Ness on the defensive line. I foresee him filling the role, to a minimum, filling the role that Van Valkenburg kind of held down in place for the last year or two. So, and I could be wrong on that. I don't know that the defense can get much worse, Mark. That's just kind of, and that sounds bad, but it really can't, can it? Can it get worse than being 123rd in the country? And don't say, yeah, they could be 124.
Cannot get worse. Cannot get worse.
And so I know you lose
measure. Yeah.
You lose Goodson, and that is a loss. And I wish the best for Tyler Goodson. I enjoyed watching Tyler Goodson at Iowa. You lose the loss of Charlie Jones is significant. Let's not downplay it. Look, I did vote on that poll before Charlie Jones entered the portal. So now weighing that, I don't know. I'd have to really kind of reevaluate it. I'd probably still say Iowa will improve because I like Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce. But I do think, I think the offensive line, I've said this since the season's end. The offensive line has to be better. And I think it will be. If it's not, we have a real problem. We have a real problem if the offensive line's not better. Yeah, I know you lose Linderbaum. Cody Ince walks away from football. Schott leaves early, which was a surprise to me. But the offensive line was not good last year. And the Iowa head coach, Kirk Ferentz, is an offensive line coach. And I know he's not micromanaging every position, but I would hope that he'd be full bore on that topic with George Barnett and helping figure out how to improve pass protection, certainly run blocking and whatnot. So as a team, I think Iowa has a chance to be a bit better than last year, at least even to a bit better. But from a record standpoint, I have a hard time seeing them get to 10 wins in the regular season because of the schedule, because of who they're playing.
Old Reliable, the real Hayden, disagrees with you, believes that the roster was more talented last year. And to Corey's last point, because a number of you mentioned this, including Wolverine Nation being the last, the question was not, is Iowa going to be better, meaning have a better record? I just simply asked, what is your evaluation of the roster?
Right.
Versus the conclusion of the season.
That's why I'm weighing it the way I do. And I respect Real Hayden's opinion. I think all of us tend to, and so you can argue maybe I'm compensating the other way, but I think all of us tend to look at what you brought up earlier, Mark, just the losses. And you're not going to be able to replace Linderbaum. And then you're losing, Dane Belton, who led the league in interceptions. And I get that, but we sometimes don't. We're looking for transfers. We're looking for 5-star recruits to come in and change things right away, maybe even a position change like Logan Jones switching to center. But sometimes we forget the fact that, hey, these guys are an entire year older. They've developed, they've went through spring, they're going through summer conditioning, they're going to have a fall camp. So that has to be weighed. And Iowa's a developmental program, Mark. So I'm also taking into account that Iowa will have guys who played last year who will be better. That's just how that works. Rarely do guys at Iowa digress. I know there's a theory that it happens at quarterback. I don't know that I can comment on that, but it doesn't. Iowa's a developmental program. You got to have faith, especially when you have one of the biggest problems for the 21 year being the offensive line. And that's the one position that if you say, hey, a Kirk Ferentz-led team should be able to improve drastically from one season to the next, you'd think it would be the offensive line, as opposed to, quarterback. I don't have nearly as much faith as of Iowa developing that position, but I do have more hope at the offensive line spot.
Corey, do you generally go into every season thinking Iowa has a good shot to win the West? I'm not saying that you've predicted them every season to win the West, but has a good shot to win the West, and also believing that should be the goal, that should be a reasonable goal. Of course, it's the goal. It's probably the stated goal of every team in the division, but a realistic goal every year.
So. Yeah, I think so. And I think that should be that way. The West is not nearly as good as the East, as you know. And I mean, I don't really know the last time. You can bring up 2012, right? Kind of the inception of the divisions. I don't know the last time that you could have said that Iowa didn't have a shot heading into the year. And I don't think anybody unbiased would have said that. So, and no, I don't predict that Iowa is going to win the West every year. I did predict it last year. But yeah, I think basically every year. Now, there have been some years, Mark, where I've said that, boy, it's going to be tough to get past Wisconsin, because they've got, whatever. They've got Melvin Gordon, or they've got somebody just ridiculous back there, and an offensive line that's just, a line of horses. And I don't feel as strongly about that this year, although I think Braylon Allen's really good. And so they're going to be tough. The hope is, and here's the other thing too, the years that I've said that Iowa has a shot and it's going to be hard to get past Wisconsin, though, part of that has been, for the most part, I'd love to track this as well. You go back through the history of this division, and it seems like when Iowa has a favorable schedule, Wisconsin has a tough one, and Wisconsin has a tough one, Iowa has a favorable one. And it seems to me, by my recollection, that there have been more years where Wisconsin actually has a very favorable schedule. And everybody wants to talk about Iowa's schedule in 15 and 2020. Seems like Wisconsin oftentimes gets a fairly favorable schedule. At least they have. And I again, it comes down to your, out of division games. But this year, all around the top three, or at least the teams that I think are going to be competing primarily, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, they all have tough schedules. So I like that. I think it's even. I think it's fair. Purdue is the one, though, and I've not made my predictions on who's going to win the division. I don't think you have either, Mark, but Purdue's the team that I would say is a real legit contender for this division, because their schedule is favorable. Everybody else's schedule is not. Nebraska's schedule is favorable, too. I don't know that they have the horses, and they're pulling out all the stops, so maybe they surprise people, but Purdue's the tough one.
Do you have an opinion on this scheduling model that the ACC implemented, or a scheduling model that you think should be implemented?
Boy, you're certainly a better authority on that. I don't love the idea of going back to 8 games. I think some people think, well, that gives Iowa an opportunity. I've never understood that line of reasoning. Well, it gives Iowa an opportunity to schedule another Power 5 out of conference game. I don't know who cares. You're playing a 9th, you're playing a 10th Power 5 opponent as it stands now, because you're playing a Big Ten team. of the second best division or second best conference in college football. So why do we need to drop one of those Big Ten games to schedule Pittsburgh and schedule Arizona? Because those were the teams that Iowa was scheduling. It was Pitt, Arizona. I'm trying to think of other teams that they had on their schedule. Arizona State, they've played them. Like, I'm not saying those are, Arizona was respectable back then. Nick Foles was the quarterback. That's not always been a bottom barrel program. But I like the fact that they've got the 9 games right now. I think people sometimes, the experts out there, don't really think about it when they like to criticize schedules like Iowa's. I think it's dumb that we have this lottery or this draft or whatever you want to call it, to where you're literally penciling in one team for a consecutive number of years. What is the point of that? What is the actual point of that, Mark? I mean, maybe 2 years in a row. Maybe you want to say, well, it's a home and home setup. I don't even know why you got to do that. But what's the point of having, I don't know if it's 3 or 4 years or 5 years, where Iowa, at least up until recently, was scheduled in to play Rutgers year after year. What is the point of it?
I really don't get that. I don't. The 2 other conferences, meaning the SEC and the ACC, have a simple cross-division rivalry that's honored every year, and then they cycle through everyone else. I have never been able to get a complete handle on the Big Ten. I've researched it and had a better handle on it in the past, but what I would do, and the one thing I have the exercise that I've gone through is taking those 3 out of division games for everybody in the Big Ten and looking at how those teams fared the season before. Yeah. And so they're all playing 9 conference games, of course. So you're looking at a 27 game sample size, and you will see teams that will play 3 teams that went 21-6 the year before, and you'll see other teams that play 3 teams that went 8-19 the year before. And I don't think there's any reason to do that.
I agree. And the problem is I'm looking at like Iowa's schedule and Rutgers' schedule. You've got schedules made out, and right now I know the conference schedules are up in the air moving forward, but you've got schedules made out until like 2029. What are we doing? Why do we do this? What is the reason? We've talked about it before with changing the college football playoff. If somebody comes up with an idea today, Mark, that the playoff needs to expand to 8 teams. I know that's not a new idea, but if it was, it would say we'd have to talk to the right people, and they'd say, well, we're going to discuss it in 2025. And then if we institute it, it'll be instituted in 2028. I just don't understand. I've never understood how college football is so slow to institute things, and why we have to have schedules made out years in advance, and even non-conference scheduling. Let me pull up. You'll like this. Iowa right now. I'm going off of FBS schedules or fbschedules.com, and I'm assuming this is official. I don't know if I'm assuming they're getting this from the University of Iowa, but I can go to the last year they have on the schedule. Iowa's currently scheduled to play Northern Illinois, Mark, on Saturday, September 15th, 2029. Okay. I mean, just why? Why do we need to do that? I know there's contracts and whatnot, but you know what? Tell you what, people who are upset that Iowa scheduled North Dakota State back in 2016. I don't know when that game got scheduled initially, but that may have been part of the problem. Because you schedule it so far in advance, and this team's better than we wanted them to be, and they may beat us. Same thing with South Dakota State this year. This is a good team they're playing.
Wolverine Nation, thank you so much for the super sticker. We appreciate the contribution there. Well, I will say this, that I consider the NFL schedule release to be one of the most overrated events on the sports calendar. But the NFL, to its credit, does a remarkable job of hyping this up, and people love it. The schedule comes out, and there's a zillion shows on Fox and ESPN going nuts, and it's all over the internet, and it's probably the biggest sports item of the week, even though it involves no one setting a foot on the field. And if anybody understands the NFL, you could sit at home and in 30 seconds figure out 12 to 14 of the 17 games for each team in the league if you know the scheduling formula.
Right.
college football could grab a huge spotlight if, let's say, May 1st every year was the schedule release, and we didn't have these ridiculous games that are scheduled 13 years in advance. We scheduled like every other sport does at the professional level during the off season. It's not hard.
I mean,
Shoot,
look
if
at
Major
what
League Baseball can figure out a travel schedule and all the scheduling over the course of an off season, then college football can do it. It's
college game day. ESPN's College Game Day is not scheduling its appearances a year in advance or even a month in advance. They wait literally till the week of, which is smart because then you know what the good matchups are.
all right, everyone. We appreciate everybody being here and welcome you back here again every Tuesday. It's at 4:30 Central Time. So do us a favor on your way out, hit the like button. Also, keep in mind to bring some other folks in here, whether they are Iowa fans. Of course, that's a priority, but college football fans in general. And let people know that we're here talking Iowa football. Get on over to From the Hawkeye of the Storm, Corey's site, and is there anything that people need to know about what's going on over there now?
Well, we got Chris Murray. Big announcement tomorrow. Kenyon told me this morning that is going to be coming tomorrow. It's the deadline. We kind of expected that, but there was some speculation that he may announce today. And once he comes back, we'll know a lot more about the future of Iowa basketball. I can tell you that. And I'll be releasing some more on Iowa baseball and its disappointing end of the season and the travesty that is Rutgers and Iowa not making the tournament. And yet, we have the whole Big Ten baseball tournament is just, I think, messed up how it's set up and the scheduling and all that. But continuous coverage. I mean, we're going to have, I've got Adam Dobbins of the Nebraska Hawks Nest YouTube channel. He's a really cool guy. Been featured on the Big Ten Network in the past for some of his memorabilia and whatnot. He'll be on my show today, actually. I'll be releasing it on my channel. So, week 195 of Brad's Branded Thoughts over at From the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube.
Nice. Meanwhile, we've got Nebraska football talk coming up here very soon. That's at 7 Eastern, 6 Central over on the Nebraska channel. We've got Parker Thune coming in from 247 Sports to talk up the Oklahoma-Nebraska showdown in September. So join us over on the Nebraska channel in just a few minutes. Corey, you have a great week, and we'll see you back here next Tuesday.
Thanks, Mark. We'll talk on the call-in show.